The morning sun cast long shadows across the broken remains of what used to be downtown Denver. Elena Vasquez stood on the roof of the old federal building, looking out at a city that barely deserved the name anymore. Where skyscrapers once reached toward the sky, now only twisted metal skeletons remained. The Great Flood of 2157 had swept away most of the lower districts, and the earthquake 3 years later had finished what the water started. Elena pulled her worn jacket tighter against the cold mountain air. At 35, she had already lived through more disasters than her grandparents had seen in their entire lives. The climate wars, the economic collapse, the Great Migration when half of North America became uninhabitable. She had watched the world break apart piece by piece, and somehow she was still here. Her radio crackled to life. "Commander, we got movement in Sector 7. Looks like raiders again." Elena sighed and picked up the radio. "How many, Martinez?" "Maybe 20. Same group as last week, I think. They got vehicles this time." Elena looked down at the courtyard below where her people were going about their morning routine. 43 souls called this place home now. They had started with over 200 when they first set up the settlement. But winter, disease, and constant raids had taken their toll. These were the survivors, the ones too stubborn or too lucky to die. "Get everyone inside the inner perimeter," Elena said into the radio. "Tell Thompson to ready the defensive positions. And Martinez, make sure the kids are in the basement." She climbed down from the roof and walked through the corridors that had once housed federal employees. Now they were home to families who had lost everything else. The walls were patched with salvaged metal and plastic sheeting. Solar panels cobbled together from a dozen different sources provided just enough power to keep the lights on and the water pumps running. Elena found her second in command, James Thompson, checking weapons in what used to be a conference room. Thompson was older than her, maybe 50, with gray hair and scars that told the story of the last 20 years. He had been a sergeant in the old Army before there was no more Army to serve. "Same raiders as before?" Thompson asked without looking up from the rifle he was cleaning. "Looks like it. They must be getting desperate to come back so soon." Thompson nodded. "Winter's coming. Everyone's getting desperate." Elena knew he was right. All across the broken continent, small groups of survivors fought over the scraps of the old world. There was no law anymore, no government, no one coming to help. The United States had officially ceased to exist 15 years ago, when the last remnants of the federal government had fled to orbital stations. Most other countries had suffered similar fates. The sound of engines grew louder outside. Elena moved to a window and peered through the bulletproof glass that had somehow survived everything else. She could see dust clouds in the distance moving fast toward their position. "They're coming in from the east," she called out. 3 vehicles, maybe 4. Her people moved with practiced efficiency. They had done this dance too many times before. Men and women took positions behind reinforced barriers. Children disappeared into the lower levels of the building where thick concrete would protect them from stray bullets. Elena thought about the reports she had been getting from other settlements. The situation was the same everywhere. In what used to be Texas, oil wars had turned the landscape into a poisoned wasteland. The great cities of the East Coast were underwater or abandoned. California had split into a dozen warring territories after the San Andreas Fault had finally given way completely. Humanity was dying. Not from any single disaster, but from 1,000 small cuts. Each crisis made the next one harder to survive. Each loss made them weaker. The population had dropped from 8 billion to less than 3 billion in just 50 years. Most of those who remained lived in scattered settlements like this one, barely hanging on. The first shots rang out as the raiders tested their defenses. Elena counted muzzle flashes and tried to estimate how many attackers they faced. The raiders had better weapons than last time, probably salvaged from one of the abandoned military bases that dotted the region. "Return fire, but make your shots count," Elena commanded through her radio. "We can't waste ammunition." The battle lasted 30 minutes. It always lasted about 30 minutes. The raiders would probe their defenses, exchange fire for a while, then retreat when they realized the settlement would cost too much to take. Both sides knew the routine by now. When the dust settled, Elena counted 3 wounded among her people and 1 dead raider left behind by his companions. It was a typical result. They had defended their home once again, but at what cost? Every bullet used was one they might need later. Every drop of medical supplies spent was irreplaceable. That evening, Elena sat in her office and tried to make sense of the supply reports. Food would last maybe 2 months if they were careful. Ammunition was running low. The solar panels needed replacement parts they couldn't manufacture. Medical supplies were almost gone. She looked at the map on her wall marked with pins showing other known settlements. Red pins for settlements that had gone dark, stopped responding to radio calls. Black pins for places that had been overrun or abandoned. Green pins for active settlements. There were far more red and black pins than green ones. Thompson knocked on her doorframe. "Mind if I come in?" Elena waved him inside. "Can't sleep either?" "Been thinking about Sarah's report from the Denver airport settlement. They haven't answered our calls in 3 days." Elena nodded grimly. The airport settlement had been home to nearly 100 people. If it had fallen, that was another piece of humanity gone forever. "Maybe their radio is broken," she said, but she didn't believe it. "Maybe," Thompson agreed, also not believing it. They sat in silence for a while. Two tired people trying to hold together a world that seemed determined to fall apart. Outside, the wind howled through the broken city, carrying the scent of rust and decay. "Sometimes I wonder if we're just delaying the inevitable," Elena said quietly. Thompson looked at her with tired eyes. "Maybe we are. But what else can we do? Give up?" Elena shook her head. "No, never that. These people depend on us. The kids depend on us." "The kids might be the last generation," Thompson said. "You ever think about that? They might be the last humans to grow up on Earth." Elena had thought about it. She thought about it every day. But she pushed the thought away now like she always did. Despair was a luxury they couldn't afford. "Then we make sure they grow up to be strong," she said. "Strong enough to survive whatever comes next." Thompson nodded and stood to leave. At the door he paused. "Elena? Sometimes I look up at the night sky and wonder if we're alone out there, if Earth is the only place where life got this far." Elena looked out her window at the stars barely visible through the pollution and dust in the atmosphere. "I hope we are alone, James, because if there's anyone else out there, I'd hate for them to see what we've become." Neither of them knew that far above Earth's atmosphere, alien sensors had been watching their world for months. The observers had seen the broken cities, the scattered settlements, the constant fighting over scraps. They had cataloged humanity's weakness and desperation. The aliens had reached their conclusion. Earth was ready for harvest. The first sign something was wrong came at dawn when all the electronic devices in the settlement started acting strange. Radios filled with static. The solar power system flickered on and off. Even the simple digital clocks began showing random numbers. Elena was drinking her morning coffee when Martinez burst into her office. His face was pale and his hands were shaking. "Commander, you need to see this now." Elena followed him to the roof where several of her people stood staring at the eastern horizon. At first, she didn't understand what she was looking at. The sky seemed darker than it should be, as if storm clouds were gathering. But the darkness had straight edges and geometric patterns that no natural cloud formation could have. "How long has it been there?" Elena asked. "About 10 minutes, said Chen, one of their scouts. "It just appeared out of nowhere. 1 second the sky was normal, the next second this thing was there." Elena raised her binoculars and focused on the dark mass. What she saw made her stomach drop. It wasn't a cloud at all. It was a structure, massive beyond anything humans had ever built. The thing stretched across kilometers of sky, all sharp angles and crystalline surfaces that reflected the morning light in strange patterns. "Get everyone to battle stations," Elena ordered, though she knew their weapons would be useless against something that size, "and try to reach other settlements on the radio. See if they're seeing this too." The radio operator, a young woman named Carrie, was already working frantically at her equipment. "I'm getting reports from everywhere, Commander. Seattle, Phoenix, what's left of Chicago. They all see the same thing. Ships in the sky." Ships. Elena realized that was exactly what they were looking at. Alien ships. More dark shapes appeared in other parts of the sky. Within an hour, the vessels hung over every major population center on Earth. The few remaining news broadcasts that still operated began reporting similar sightings worldwide. London, Tokyo, Sao Paulo. Everywhere humans still gathered, the ships appeared. Elena's radio crackled with a transmission unlike anything she had ever heard. The voice that spoke was clearly artificial, but it formed words in perfect English. "People of Earth, we are the architects of unity, servants of the hegemony that spans 1,000 worlds. Your species has been evaluated and found suitable for integration into our empire. The transmission continued across all frequencies simultaneously. Every radio, every surviving television broadcast, every communication device on Earth carried the same message. Your civilization has reached its natural end. Your wars, your environmental destruction, your social collapse, all of this demonstrates that your species cannot govern itself effectively. We offer you the gift of unity under our guidance. Elena felt her hands clench into fists. The aliens spoke as if they were doing humanity a favor. You have 72 hours to surrender unconditionally. Your military forces will stand down. Your leaders will report to designated collection points for processing. Resistance will be met with overwhelming force. Compliance will be rewarded with preservation. The transmission ended, leaving only static. Thompson appeared at Elena's side. Well, that's not good. Any response from the orbital stations? Elena asked Carrie. Carrie shook her head. Nothing. Either they can't respond or they're not there anymore. Elena understood. The first thing any competent invasion force would do is eliminate orbital assets. The few thousand humans living on space stations and moon bases were probably already dead or captured. Over the next 24 hours, the aliens demonstrated their power. Cities that still had substantial populations simply vanished in flashes of blue light. Los Angeles, what remained of New York. The settlement complexes around the Great Lakes, gone in an instant. The aliens weren't using nuclear weapons or conventional explosives. The cities just stopped existing, leaving behind perfectly circular craters of smooth glass. The message was clear. This is what happens to those who might resist. Elena gathered her core team in the old conference room. 43 people was hardly an army, but they were her people and she would not abandon them. Options? She asked. We could try to hide, suggested Martinez. Find caves in the mountains, go underground. For how long? Thompson asked. These beings have ships that can cross space. You think they can't find us underground? We could surrender, said Chen quietly. Maybe they're telling the truth about preservation. Elena looked around the room at faces she had known for years. These people had survived everything the dying Earth could throw at them. They had endured floods and earthquakes, raids and starvation, disease and despair. They were the toughest humans left alive. Anyone else want to vote for surrender? Elena asked. Silence. Good. Because I don't believe them for a second. You don't bring that much firepower to relocate refugees. You bring it to conquer. The second demonstration of alien power came 36 hours after the first transmission. 3 massive ships descended from orbit and landed in the ruins of major military bases. From these ships came armies of creatures that looked like a nightmare fusion of machine and biology. The things stood 3 meters tall on 4 legs that ended in clawed feet. Their torsos were humanoid but covered in what looked like living metal. They had no visible faces, just smooth surfaces where heads should be. But they moved with perfect coordination. These soldiers began spreading out from their landing sites, moving in formation toward any location where humans might be hiding. They didn't seem to need rest or supplies. They just marched, scanning everything with sensors that could detect life signs from kilometers away. Elena watched through binoculars as a column of the creatures approached their position. There were maybe 50 of them, moving in perfect lines across the broken landscape. Their metal skin reflected the sunlight like mirrors. They'll be here in 6 hours, Thompson reported. Should we evacuate? Elena considered it. They could load up their vehicles and head for the mountains. But where would they go? The aliens had ships in orbit. They could track vehicles easily. Running would just delay the inevitable. No, Elena decided. We make our stand here. Against 50 of those things? Martinez asked. With what? Hunting rifles and improvised explosives. With whatever we have, Elena replied. If we're going to die, we die fighting. But as Elena prepared her people for battle, she began to notice something strange. The alien soldiers moved with perfect coordination, but they also moved predictably. They followed straight lines. They responded to threats in identical ways. They seemed to lack the creativity and adaptability that made humans dangerous. An idea began forming in Elena's mind. These creatures were advanced, yes, but were they smart? The aliens had conquered 1,000 worlds, according to their own boast. But what kind of worlds? Planets with unified governments that could surrender? Species that fought conventional wars with armies and navies? Earth was different. Earth was broken. There was no government to surrender, no army to defeat. There were only scattered groups of survivors who had learned to fight dirty, just to stay alive. Elena smiled for the first time since the ships had appeared. "Change of plans," she announced to her team. "We're not going to fight them like soldiers. We're going to fight them like scavengers." The first alien patrol reached the outskirts of Denver as the sun was setting. They moved through the ruins in perfect formation, scanning methodically for human life signs. Their sensors detected the settlement immediately, and they began advancing toward the federal building. They never reached it. Elena had learned something important during the endless raids and resource wars. Sometimes the best defense isn't to fight your enemy where they're strong. Sometimes the best defense is to make your enemy fight you where you're strong. The alien patrol walked into a maze of rubble and debris that had been carefully arranged over the past few hours. Every piece of concrete, every twisted beam of metal, every chunk of broken road had been positioned to create blind spots and bottlenecks. When the aliens triggered the first improvised explosive, they responded exactly as Elena had hoped. They scattered to predetermined positions and began firing at shadows. Their advanced weapons obliterated tons of rubble, but the humans weren't hiding in the rubble. They were hiding in places the aliens couldn't scan, using techniques developed through years of evading human raiders. By morning, 5 alien soldiers lay motionless in the ruins. The rest had withdrawn to regroup. Elena stood over one of the fallen creatures and studied it closely. Up close, she could see that the living metal skin was actually some kind of armor covering biological tissue underneath. These things could be killed. More importantly, she could see something like confusion in the way the remaining aliens had retreated. They weren't used to enemies that fought like this. "We hurt them," Thompson said with satisfaction. "More than that," Elena replied. "I think we surprised them." Around the world, other human settlements were learning the same lesson. The aliens were powerful, but they were also predictable. They expected enemies to fight like civilized armies. They didn't know how to handle opponents who had already learned to survive in chaos. The war for Earth had begun, and it wasn't going the way the architects of unity had expected. 3 weeks after the first alien patrol had been ambushed in Denver, Elena crouched in the ruins of an old shopping mall, watching another patrol through her scope. The aliens had adapted somewhat to human tactics, but they were still making mistakes. They moved in smaller groups now, but they still moved predictably. Elena had learned a lot about their enemy in those 3 weeks. The alien soldiers communicated through some kind of wireless link that connected their minds. When one of them spotted a threat, they all knew about it instantly. When one was damaged, the others seemed to feel it too. This should have made them harder to fight, but Elena had discovered it also made them vulnerable in unexpected ways. She keyed her radio. "Martinez, you in position?" "Ready when you are, Commander." "Chen, Thompson, report. Chen here. I have visual on the target." "Thompson, ready. The surprise is set." Elena watched the patrol of 8 alien soldiers move through the mall's main corridor. They were following the same route they had used for the past week, checking the same stores in the same order. Creatures that could cross space but couldn't learn to vary their patrol patterns. "Now," Elena whispered into her radio. Martinez triggered the first explosion 50 meters behind the patrol. The aliens immediately spun around and began moving toward the sound, just as Elena had expected. They were programmed to investigate disturbances, and they always did it the same way. As the patrol moved away from their position, Chen disabled the rear guard with a single rifle shot. The moment that alien went down, the other 7 stopped moving entirely. They stood frozen in place for almost 30 seconds, and Elena could swear she heard something like electronic screaming coming from their direction. "Hit them now while they're confused," Elena ordered. Thompson's surprise was a section of the mall's upper level that had been rigged to collapse. When he triggered the charges, tons of concrete and steel came crashing down on 4 of the remaining aliens. The other 3 tried to run but were caught in carefully placed crossfire. When the dust settled, Elena's team had eliminated another full patrol without losing a single person. "That's the 5th patrol this week," Thompson said as they gathered salvageable equipment from the alien bodies. "Think they're starting to notice?" Elena nodded grimly. "Oh, they're noticing. Question is, what are they going to do about it?" She was about to find out. Reports had been coming in from survivor settlements across the continent. The pattern was the same everywhere. Small groups of humans were using guerrilla tactics to harass alien patrols. The creatures that had conquered 1,000 worlds were struggling to deal with an enemy that refused to fight fair. In the ruins of Seattle, a group of former tech workers had figured out how to jam the aliens' communication networks. In the Arizona desert, Navajo survivors were using traditional hunting techniques to track and eliminate isolated alien scouts. In the flooded remains of Houston, salvage crews were turning the underwater city into a maze of death traps. But the aliens were learning too. Elena discovered this when her radio picked up a transmission that made her blood run cold. "All human resistance elements," the artificial voice announced. "Your actions have been noted and cataloged. Effective immediately. For every alien soldier killed, we will eliminate 10 human settlements. You have 24 hours to cease all hostile activities." Elena stared at her radio in horror. How many settlements were left on Earth? Maybe a few thousand. If the aliens carried out their threat, millions of people would die. Thompson found her sitting alone in what used to be the mall's food court, staring at the broken fountain in the center. "You heard the transmission," he said. Elena nodded. "We have to stop. If we keep fighting, they'll wipe out what's left of humanity. And if we stop fighting, they'll wipe us out anyway, just more slowly." Elena knew he was right. The aliens hadn't come to Earth to preserve humanity. They had come to harvest what was useful and dispose of the rest. The only choice was whether to die fighting or die kneeling. But there was something else bothering Elena. Something about the alien transmission that didn't make sense. "James, why did they give us 24 hours? Why not just start the executions immediately?" Thompson frowned. "Maybe they're being merciful?" "No. They've shown they don't understand mercy. So why the delay?" Elena spent the rest of the day thinking about that question. The aliens had overwhelming technological superiority. They could destroy any human settlement whenever they wanted. So why negotiate? Why make threats instead of just acting? The answer came to her as she was reviewing reports from other settlements. The aliens weren't just losing soldiers to human attacks. They were losing them faster than they had expected. Much faster. Elena pulled out her calculator and started working with the numbers they had gathered. Estimated alien casualties versus estimated deployment. Rate of loss versus time invested. What she discovered made her smile for the first time in days. "Thompson, get everyone together. I need to talk to the group." 20 minutes later, Elena stood before the 43 people who made up her settlement. They looked tired and scared, but they were still here. Still alive, still willing to listen. "I've been thinking about that alien transmission," Elena began, "about why they're threatening us instead of just killing us. And I think I know why." She pointed to a map she had spread on a table. Red marks showed known alien positions. Blue marks showed human settlements that were still active. "Look at this pattern. The aliens landed at major military bases and population centers. They expected to face organized resistance from government forces. Instead, they're dealing with thousands of small groups that they can't predict or control." Elena drew lines connecting the alien positions. "They're losing soldiers faster than they expected. A lot faster. And here's the important part. I don't think they brought enough troops for a long campaign." Martinez raised his hand. "But, Commander, they have ships in orbit. They could bring down more soldiers, could they?" Elena asked. "Think about it. If you're running an empire that spans 1,000 worlds, how many soldiers can you commit to one planet? Even if that empire is huge, it has to defend all those other worlds too." Elena could see understanding dawning on several faces. They expected Earth to surrender quickly, like every other world they've conquered. When that didn't happen, they committed enough forces to crush organized resistance. But we're not organized resistance. We're something they've never faced before. Thompson caught on first. "You think they're overstretched?" "I think they're in trouble," Elena replied. "And that transmission proves it. They're trying to scare us into stopping because they can't afford to lose soldiers at this rate." Chen spoke up from the back of the group. "But what about their threat? What about the other settlements?" Elena had thought about that too. "They said they'd destroy 10 settlements for every soldier we kill. But which settlements? They'd have to find them first, and we know they're having trouble with that. Most settlements are hidden, scattered, mobile. The aliens might destroy some, but they can't destroy them all. Not quickly." "So what are you suggesting?" asked Martinez. Elena looked around at her people, dirty, tired, hungry, but unbroken. "I'm suggesting we call their bluff. I'm suggesting we keep fighting. And I'm suggesting we spread the word to every other settlement we can reach. She pointed to the radio equipment. We tell them what we've figured out. We tell them the aliens are weaker than they pretend to be. We tell them that every human group that keeps fighting makes the aliens' job harder. And if you're wrong, Thompson asked quietly, if they really do start wiping out settlements? Elena met his eyes. Then we die fighting instead of dying slowly. But I don't think I'm wrong. I think these aliens are used to easy victories. I think they came here expecting to add another trophy to their collection, and instead they found something they don't know how to handle. She looked at each of her people in turn. Humans who have already lost everything. Humans who learned to survive in hell. Humans who don't know how to quit. Elena turned to Carrie, their radio operator. Send out the message on all frequencies. Tell every settlement that can hear us. The aliens are not as strong as they seem. Keep fighting. Make them pay for every inch of ground. Show them that conquering Earth is going to cost more than they're willing to spend. As Carrie began transmitting, Elena walked back to the window and looked out at the darkening sky. Alien ships still hung like dark stars against the sunset. But they didn't seem quite as intimidating anymore. Somewhere up there, Elena was certain, alien commanders were discovering that Earth was not like the other worlds they had conquered. Earth was inhabited by a species that thrived on adversity, that grew stronger when broken, that fought hardest when defeat seemed certain. The aliens had come to harvest a dying world. Instead, they had walked into a trap made of human stubbornness and desperation. Elena smiled as she watched the stars come out. This war was far from over, but for the first time since the ships had appeared, she believed humanity might actually win. Elena's message had spread across the remnants of human civilization like wildfire. 2 months after the first alien landings, reports were coming in from everywhere. Human settlements were fighting back with increasing coordination and effectiveness. The aliens' deadline had passed without the promised mass executions. Either they couldn't carry out their threats, or they were too busy dealing with the growing resistance to focus on revenge. Elena stood in what used to be the Denver Museum of Science, now serving as a temporary command center for 3 combined settlements. Word had come through that other survivor groups were trying to coordinate, and Elena's successful track record had made her a natural leader for the region. Status report. Elena called out as she entered the main hall where salvaged computers and radio equipment had been set up between dinosaur skeletons. Carrie looked up from her communication station. We're in contact with 47 settlements across the western half of the continent. 31 in the east. Unknown numbers in other regions, but we're getting scattered reports from everywhere. Any word from the European settlements? Some. A group in the Scottish Highlands says they've developed a way to interfere with alien sensors using electromagnetic pulses from old medical equipment. A settlement in the Italian Alps claims they've captured intact alien technology. Elena felt a surge of hope. If humans around the world were innovating and adapting, the aliens were facing a nightmare scenario. Every solution developed by one group could potentially be shared with others. Thompson approached with a grim expression. Elena, we've got a problem. Long-range scouts report a massive alien force moving this way. Not patrol strength, army strength. Looks like they're done playing games. Elena followed him to the tactical map they had set up near the planetarium. Red markers showed the approaching alien force. There were hundreds of the biomechanical soldiers, supported by vehicles that floated above the ground and larger creatures that looked like walking weapons platforms. How long until they reach us? 18 hours, maybe 20. Elena studied the map. Her combined settlement now had nearly 200 people, but most were civilians. She had maybe 60 people who could fight effectively. Against hundreds of alien soldiers with advanced technology, it would be a slaughter. We need to evacuate, Martinez said. Fall back to the mountain positions. No, Elena replied. We run now, we'll be running forever. Besides, I think this is exactly what we've been waiting for. Thompson stared at her. What do you mean? Elena pointed to the radio equipment. For 2 months, we've been fighting small actions against patrols and scouts. Now they're committing a major force. That means we've been hurting them badly enough to force their hand. She turned to face the group. Think about it. If the aliens were winning easily, they wouldn't need to deploy army-sized forces against scattered settlements. They're doing this because their original plan failed. Chen, who had become one of Elena's best scouts, nodded slowly. The commander's right. We've been getting reports that alien patrols are avoiding certain areas entirely. They're acting scared. But this force is too big for us to handle with guerrilla tactics, Martinez protested. Elena smiled. Who says we're going to fight them with guerrilla tactics? Over the next 12 hours, Elena's plan took shape. Instead of running or hiding, the settlement would do something the aliens would never expect. They would stand and fight in the open. But not alone. Elena had been coordinating with settlements across a 1,000-kilometer radius. Using the aliens' own predictable behavior patterns against them, she had calculated exactly where and when the enemy force would move. More importantly, she'd convinced 17 other settlements to converge on the same location. It's crazy, Thompson said as they made final preparations. Even with the other groups, we'll be outnumbered 3-1. Numbers aren't everything, Elena replied. We've learned that the aliens' greatest strength is also their weakness. They're connected to each other, right? They share information instantly and coordinate perfectly. But what happens when that coordination breaks down? Elena had been studying the alien soldiers for months. She had noticed that when one was killed or severely damaged, the others in the immediate area seemed to suffer some kind of feedback. The effect was brief, but it was real. The aliens' networked consciousness made them efficient, but it also made them vulnerable to systemic shock. The battle began at dawn. The alien army approached the museum in perfect formation, their weapons charging with an ominous hum. Elena's people were positioned inside the building and in the ruins around it, but they weren't hiding. They were visible, deliberately presenting targets. The aliens deployed exactly as Elena had predicted. They surrounded the building and began their attack with devastating energy weapons that carved through concrete and steel like butter. Elena's people returned fire, but their conventional weapons barely scratched the aliens' armor. For 30 minutes, it looked like a conventional battle that the humans were losing badly. Elena's forces took casualties and fell back through the museum halls. The aliens advanced methodically, clearing each room with overwhelming firepower. Then Elena triggered the real trap. The other 17 settlements had been moving into position during the night, encircling the aliens while they focused on the museum. When Elena gave the signal, nearly 800 humans attacked the alien army from all sides simultaneously. But the attack wasn't random. Elena had coordinated it carefully based on everything they had learned about alien psychology and tactics. Every human group targeted the same alien soldiers at the same time, creating a cascade of feedback through the aliens' networked consciousness. The effect was devastating. As dozens of alien soldiers were killed or disabled in the same instant, the feedback surge rippled through their entire force. Elena watched through her scope as alien soldiers stopped moving entirely, some collapsing, others firing wildly at nothing. Now, Elena shouted into her radio, "Hit them while they're confused." The human forces pressed their advantage. Improvised explosives and salvaged weapons tore into alien ranks that were no longer coordinating their defense. Vehicles that had seemed invincible moments before were destroyed by teams of humans who had learned to work together despite having no formal military training. The battle lasted 4 hours. When it ended, the alien army had been destroyed almost completely. Only a handful of enemy soldiers escaped, and they fled in complete disorder. Elena stood in the smoking ruins of the museum, surrounded by wreckage from both sides. They had won, but the cost had been terrible. Nearly half the human fighters were dead or wounded. The museum itself was destroyed. But they had proven something important. "We can beat them," Thompson said, his voice filled with wonder. "We can actually beat them in open battle." Elena nodded, but she was thinking about something else. Throughout the fight, she had noticed something strange about the aliens' behavior. In the final phase of the battle, when their coordination broke down, some of them had seemed to panic. They had made desperate, irrational decisions. They had acted for the first time like they were afraid. Carrie approached with a radio in her hand. "Commander, we're getting reports from all over. Word of the battle is spreading. Settlements everywhere are launching attacks on alien positions. It's like the whole planet is rising up at once." Elena took the radio and listened to the chatter. From California to New York, from Canada to Mexico, human settlements were reporting successful attacks against alien forces. The victory at the museum had been a signal that the aliens could be beaten, and humans everywhere were responding. But Elena knew this was just the beginning. The aliens still had overwhelming technological superiority. They still had ships in orbit and forces on other continents. The war was far from over. However, something fundamental had changed. The aliens had lost the aura of invincibility. They had shown that they could be confused, frightened, and defeated. More importantly, humans had shown they could coordinate and fight as a unified force when necessary. Elena looked up at the alien ships that still hung in the sky like dark clouds. They seemed smaller now, less threatening. For 2 months, those ships had been symbols of human helplessness. Now they were just targets. "Carrie, send out another message to all settlements," Elena ordered. "Tell them we've learned something important today. The aliens aren't just connected to each other. They're dependent on that connection. When we disrupt it, they break down completely." She paused, thinking about the implications. "Tell them we know how to win this war. We just need to scale up our attacks, hit them everywhere at once, make their greatest strength into their greatest weakness." As night fell over the battlefield, Elena could see lights in the distance. Not the cold glow of alien technology, but the warm flicker of human fires. Settlements that had been hiding were emerging. Survivors who had given up hope were finding it again. The aliens had come to Earth expecting to harvest a dying civilization. Instead, they had awakened something that had been sleeping in humanity's darkest hour: the will to fight back, to survive, to prove that humans were not prey to be harvested, but predators to be feared. The war for Earth had entered a new phase, and for the first time since the ships had appeared, Elena believed humanity was going to win. 6 months after the first alien ships had appeared in Earth's skies, Elena stood on the rim of what used to be the Grand Canyon, looking down at an alien command center that was very much still operational. The massive crystalline structure pulsed with energy, sending signals to orbital ships and ground forces across the continent. It was the nerve center for the entire alien operation in North America, and Elena was about to destroy it. The war had changed dramatically since the victory at the museum. Elena's successful tactics had spread across the globe like a virus, adapted and improved by thousands of human settlements. The aliens' perfect coordination had become their greatest weakness as humans learned to exploit the feedback effects of their networked consciousness. But the aliens had adapted too. They had started using smaller, more independent units. They had developed countermeasures for human tactics. Most importantly, they had begun targeting human command structures, trying to disrupt the coordination that made large-scale attacks possible. Elena herself had become a priority target. Intelligence reports suggested that the aliens had identified her as a key resistance leader and were dedicating significant resources to her capture or elimination. That was why she was here, at the most heavily defended alien position on the continent, leading what would either be the decisive blow of the war or a glorious suicide mission. "Final systems check," Elena spoke into her radio. Around the canyon, nearly 3,000 human fighters from 200 different settlements prepared for the largest coordinated attack in human history. The plan was ambitious beyond anything they had attempted before. Instead of hitting the command center directly, they would attack every alien position in a 1,000-kilometer radius simultaneously, creating a feedback cascade that would hopefully overload the aliens' network and leave the command center vulnerable. "Team Alpha ready," came the first response. Alpha Team was led by Chen, positioned near the ruins of Phoenix. Team Beta ready. Martinez had taken a group to hit alien positions around Lawson. Vegas Team Gamma ready. Thompson was leading the assault on alien forces near the Colorado River. One by one, 17 different teams reported ready status. Elena checked her watch. In 10 minutes, every team would begin their attacks at exactly the same moment. The timing had to be perfect, or the cascade effect wouldn't work. Elena looked through her binoculars at the alien command center. The structure was beautiful in an alien way, all flowing curves and impossible angles that seemed to shift when she wasn't looking directly at them. Hundreds of the biomechanical soldiers patrolled the perimeter, and she could see larger creatures that looked like living weapons platforms moving among the spires. 2 minutes, Elena announced. "Remember, this only works if we hit them all at once. Don't start early, don't hesitate, and don't stop until the target is destroyed." Elena's own team consisted of 50 volunteers, many of whom had been with her since the early days in Denver. They were armed with a mixture of salvaged human weapons and captured alien technology. Over the months, several settlements had become skilled at reverse engineering alien equipment, though human-made versions were crude compared to the originals. 30 seconds, Elena said. watching the second hand on her watch crawl toward the appointed time. She thought about everything that had led to this moment. The broken cities, the scattered settlements, the desperate fights for survival. Humanity had been on the edge of extinction when the aliens arrived. And in a twisted way, the invasion had given them something they had lost. Purpose. 10 seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Execute. Elena's team opened fire on the command center's outer defenses while 17 other teams simultaneously attacked alien positions across the southwestern United States. The effect was immediate and more dramatic than Elena had dared to hope. The biomechanical soldiers around the command center suddenly stopped moving. For nearly 30 seconds, they stood frozen like statues as their networked consciousness was overwhelmed by feedback from attacks happening hundreds of kilometers away. When they began moving again, their coordination was completely broken. They fired at each other, ran in random directions, or simply collapsed. Move, move, move. Elena shouted as her team charged down into the canyon. The assault on the command center became a running battle through twisting corridors and impossible geometries. The alien structure seemed to shift and change as they moved through it, but Elena's people had learned to adapt to the aliens' strange technology. They moved in small groups, used unconventional routes, and struck at targets the aliens couldn't predict. Elena reached the central command chamber just as reports began coming in from the other teams. The simultaneous attacks had worked better than anyone had expected. Alien forces across the continent were in complete disarray. Some orbital ships had actually crashed as their crews lost coordination. The command chamber was a sphere of crystalline material 50 meters across, filled with floating displays and control surfaces that responded to alien thoughts. At the center of the sphere, a single alien creature sat motionless in what looked like a meditation pose. Unlike the biomechanical soldiers, this one was clearly organic, with pale skin and large eyes that held an unmistakably intelligent gaze. Elena approached carefully, her weapon ready. The alien made no move to defend itself or call for help. It simply watched her with those large, dark eyes. "You are the one they call Elena," the alien said in perfect English, though its lips didn't move. The voice seemed to come from the air around them. "And you are?" Elena replied, keeping her weapon trained on the creature. "I am the regional coordinator for this sector of your planet. I am what you would call the commanding officer." Elena studied the alien's face. It looked tired, almost defeated. "Are you surrendering?" "I am acknowledging reality," the alien replied. "Your species is not suitable for integration into the hegemony." Elena felt a surge of triumph, but she kept her expression neutral. "Why, because we're too violent? Too primitive? Because you are unpredictable," the alien said. "In 1,000 previous conquests, we have never encountered a species that grows stronger through adversity. Most civilizations collapse when their infrastructure is damaged. Yours learned to function without infrastructure." The alien gestured at the displays around them, which showed scenes of human settlements around the world. "Most species become easier to defeat when their population is scattered. Yours became harder to defeat, because scattered populations could not be eliminated with single strikes." Elena realized she was witnessing something unprecedented. An alien trying to understand why their conquest had failed. Most species surrender when faced with overwhelming technological superiority, the alien continued. "Yours treated our technology as a resource to be captured and reverse-engineered. You turned our own weapons against us. So what happens now?" Elena asked. The alien was quiet for a long moment. "Now we leave. The Hegemony Council has voted to classify your world as unsuitable for integration. We will withdraw our forces and place your system on the forbidden list." Elena blinked in surprise. "Just like that? You're giving up?" "The cost-benefit analysis no longer supports continued operations," the alien explained. "We have lost more soldiers on your world than in the previous 50 conquests combined. Your resistance has inspired rebellions on 7 other worlds. The hegemony cannot afford to continue this campaign." Elena looked around at the command chamber, at the incredible technology that surrounded them. "What about all this? The ships, the weapons, the command centers? We will take what we can carry. The rest will be abandoned. Perhaps your species can learn something useful from our technology." Elena felt a mix of emotions: triumph, relief, and oddly, a small amount of sympathy for this creature that had watched its perfect plan fall apart. "Can I ask you something?" Elena said. "Why did you think we would be easy to conquer?" The alien's expression shifted in what might have been the equivalent of a sad smile. Because your world was dying. Your civilization was collapsing. Your people were scattered and fighting each other. Every indication suggested you were a weak species in terminal decline. And instead we discovered that you were a species that had already adapted to survive in hostile conditions. You had already learned to function while broken, to fight while outnumbered, to hope while facing extinction. We thought we were attacking a weak civilization. We were actually attacking a civilization of survivors. Elena lowered her weapon. Through the radio chatter in her earpiece, she could hear reports from around the world. Alien forces were withdrawing everywhere. Ships were leaving orbit. The war was over. One more question, Elena said. Will you be back? The alien stood and moved toward what looked like a transport platform. No. Your system will be marked as a forbidden zone. The hegemony has many worlds to choose from. We prefer ones that can be conquered without teaching the galaxy that resistance is possible. As the alien prepared to leave, Elena realized something important. Humanity hadn't just won a war. They had won their freedom, and perhaps more importantly, they had won the right to be left alone. The alien paused at the transport platform. Your species will likely destroy itself within a few generations. Most species do, after experiencing this level of trauma and upheaval.